mothers here. I really enjoyed the pancake breakfast provided by the Junior YBA this morning, as always, every year. I hope that many of you are celebrating Mother's Day with your mothers, or if your mothers have passed on, then you're thinking of your mothers. My mother is living in Oregon. She comes down to visit us quite often. She's going to be 91 end of this month, still driving, still going to bingo once a week, still playing cards with her friends. I was thinking about all that my mother had to do growing up. As I was growing up, she was a farmer's wife, so she had to work in the fields, she had to weed onions, she had to hoe sugar beets, she had to drive the harvest truck at the harvest time, and she would work in the fields from 7 in the morning till 5 in the evening, and then rush home at 5 and have dinner ready in 1 hour by 6 o'clock. We always had dinner at 6 o'clock. She had hot dinner ready. Usually rice and okazu, stir-fried vegetables or something. And then after dinner, laundry and housework and sewing and this and that into the late at night, and then get up in the morning again. One day she decided to figure out how far she walked in a day when she was hoeing sugar beets. She'd go up and down the rows, pulling the weeds, and along with some other workers. And it was a quarter-mile field. So she's just going to figure out how many times she went back and forth and add up how far she walked in one day. To her amazement, 19 miles. And this is every day. Every day walking 19 miles, and not just strolling down the highway. This is in the sugar beet field, on the soft dirt, through the leaves of the sugar beets, pulling weeds as you go. Every day, 19 miles. You don't have to join a fitness club if you walk 19 miles a day. And then all the other things that a wife and mother does every evening. So looking back on those years, my mother really did a lot. Without a lot of the conveniences that we have nowadays, microwave ovens and whatnot. So that generation really did some amazing things to provide for us as children. So we're preparing to have my mother move down and live with us eventually. So recently we purchased a home. It's being remodeled. And this week has been one of the most, what shall I say, difficult weeks of my life. Moving. We have so much stuff. How did we get all of this stuff? Boxes and boxes of stuff in the garage, stuff in the house. Oh, there's so much stuff. Then I recalled a wonderful stand-up comedian, George Carlin, who does a routine on stuff. And so you can access it on YouTube later today. You can just on YouTube search George Carlin and his stand-up on stuff. So I'm going to share. This is not my material. This is George Carlin's about stuff, just part of his. I wanted to play the video, but he uses some very colorful language, so I didn't think it was quite appropriate. So George Carlin writes, "The meaning of life is trying to find a place for your stuff. That's all your house is. Your house is just a place for your stuff. If you didn't have so much stuff, you wouldn't need a house. You could just walk around all the time. That's all your house is, a pile of stuff with a cover on it. When you take off on an airplane, you just see everybody's got their own pile of stuff. And when you leave your stuff, you got to lock it up. You don't want somebody to come by and take some of your stuff. And they always take the good stuff. They don't bother with the junk you're saving. Nobody's interested in your 4th grade arithmetic papers. That's all your house is, a place to keep all of your stuff. So you can go out and get more stuff. Sometimes you got to move. You got to get a bigger house. Why? Too much stuff. You got to move all of your stuff and maybe put some of your stuff in storage. Imagine that. There's a whole industry on keeping an eye on your stuff. Just a little bit from George Carlin. So I wanted to share with you today for Mother's Day my very, very favorite poem, not just for Mother's Day, but really one of the most beautiful poems I've ever read, written by the late Reverend Haya Akegarasu. It was translated by the late Reverend Gyoko Saito of the Higashi Honganji. Now, Reverend Akegarasu was a Jodo Shinshu minister of the Higashi Honganji tradition in Japan. He passed away, I believe, in the 1950s. He lost his father at a very young age, so he was raised primarily by his mother. So he was very, very close to his mother. So when his mother passed away, he took it very hard, but he composed this most beautiful poem, and it goes as follows. Though I may try for the rest of my life to praise my mother's virtues, I haven't enough time to express them all. No one except my mother loved me absolutely, and no one except myself loved my mother in the same way. Like a blind person, my mother loved me blindly. My mother, my dear mother. My mother's virtue was simply this: to love her husband and her child more than anything else. Though there are billions of people and billions of mothers, my own mother is undoubtedly the best. One day I asked my mother, "What would you do if I gave you $1 million?" She replied, "I would give it right back to you." After my mother passed away, I searched and searched to find her. And finally I found her. I found her in my own being. Only my mother trusted me completely, beyond judgments of good and bad. How I long for her. I have tasted delicious foods from around the world, but for me, the only food truly delicious are the meals my mother prepared for me. Let my life shine out, for it was nurtured with the blood and tears of my mother as its nourishment. Even though there are many other children who love their mothers as much as I love mine, there can be no other mothers who love their children as much as my mother loves me. Very beautiful poem, isn't it, by Reverend Akegarasu? And I'm sure we can all relate to parts of this poem, whether we have our mothers with us in this world or whether they have since passed on. It's really true what he says, this verse on, I have tasted delicious foods from around the world, but for me, the only food truly delicious are the meals my mother prepared for me. We could eat in fancy restaurants like Roy's, Lori's Prime Rib. I've never even eaten at Lori's Prime Rib. I don't know why I mentioned that restaurant, but I'd like to go there someday. So you could have a fancy, fancy dinner, but when you really think about it, the most delicious meals we've ever had in our life, weren't they those home-cooked meals by our mothers? I mean, I used to get excited when we just had fried Spam and hot rice, when I was growing up, or it could be something very simple, but it was so delicious because it was prepared, by our mothers. Now, I think many people know I like to cook, and so I do most of the cooking in our family. I hope someday my children will interpret this poem, this part of the poem. I have tasted delicious foods from around the world, but for me, the only food truly delicious are the meals my father prepared for me. But they'll still probably think it's their mom's cooking. The part of this poem that I would like to point out, especially for those who have lost their mothers and are thinking of their mothers today on Mother's Day, he writes in this poem very poetically, "After my mother passed away, I searched and searched to find her." So I think poetically he's saying that he just deeply missed the physical presence of his mother. When we lose a loved one, we miss them physically. We can't see them anymore. We can't talk with them anymore. We can't share a meal together, laugh together, cry together. So we deeply miss the physical presence of our loved one. So he writes this very poetically, that after he lost his mother, he just deeply, deeply missed her. And so he searched and searched to find her. But finally, he found her. See, I found her in my own being. I found her in my own being. Meaning, he realized the true essence, the true heart of his mother is something that is timeless, that was always there and will always be there. That's how I interpret, this part of the poem. So we too, even after losing our beloved mothers, find deep within our own being their true heart, their true essence. So I wanted to share first this poem for Mother's Day, one of my very, very favorite poems of all time. So in addition to Reverend Akagasu's poem, I also want to share poems by another wonderful Shin Buddhist. Her name was Ayako Suzuki. Ayako Suzuki. Ayako Suzuki was the wife of a Jodo Shinshu minister. And her life was going on just fine, beautifully. She had a temple life. She had 4 children. But then she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so, as anyone would feel, her life was thrown into great turmoil. She was asking questions like, well, why did this have to happen to me? And then she also realized that, well, maybe her understanding of the Buddha Dharma was not at a level that it should have been all these years. And so she listened even more intently to the Buddha Dharma and came to have a very deep understanding and came to receive the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, as a deep and profound truth. And then she composed a book of poems. So she composed a book of poems titled in Japanese, Gan Kokuchi no Atode. So after the diagnosis of cancer. So after this diagnosis of cancer, now spiritually, she came to this kind of insight. And so I'd like to share just a couple of her poems that I've translated. It's a book in Japanese, and I've translated just a few poems into English. I just want to share a couple with you. This is one of her poems. Now, as I sit here talking and laughing with my husband and children, I realize that we have, I should have been done so, we have done so for maybe thousands of times. But when I reflect that there might not be tomorrow, I feel like embracing them all. She's having dinner with her family, just as they always do, maybe thousands and thousands of times. And you don't think anything about it, and you take it for granted. But now, with this diagnosis of cancer, who knows if there's even tomorrow? So she has this heart and mind of wanting to embrace her entire family. Then this poem, she writes, I will become Namo Amida Butsu for my children. I will become Namo Amida Butsu for my friends and temple members. When you think of me, please say Namu Amida Butsu, and I will call the Nembutsu in return. So for Ayako Suzuki, when I first saw this poem, I think I misunderstood it. I thought, well, gee, how can you become a word? How does a person become a word? But for her, Namu Amida Butsu is not just a word. It is not just something we say. It is not just a recitation. It is a deep and profound truth. It's a deep and profound truth in which her heart and mind has become one with the heart and mind of the Buddhas. Her heart and mind has become one with this timeless truth of the Buddha Dharma, timeless truth of Namu Amida Butsu. So, when her life comes to an end, she will become that truth. She will become Namu Amida Butsu for her dearest children that she leaves behind, for her friends and temple members. She becomes one with them in Namu Amida Butsu. Therefore, she writes, when you think of me, when you miss me, please say Namu Amida Butsu, and I will call the Nembutsu in return. And so this poem, to me, shows how we transcend life and death. We transcend life and death. Time and space is transcended when we come to receive the Nembutsu as a deep and profound truth. For those of you who have lost your mothers, your heart and mind is one with them in the truth of Namu Amida Butsu, and our hearts and minds are one with the Buddhas and really with the oneness of life when we come to receive the Nembutsu as a deep and profound truth. I hope that all of you have a wonderful Mother's Day. Please go out to a lunch or dinner or celebrate with your family. And like Ayako Suzuki writes, when we're having dinner, it's not just another dinner, it's not just another day. We have a heart and mind of wanting to embrace each and every member of our family. Naman Davutz, Naman Davutz, Naman Davutz, Naman Davutz, Naman Davutz.